Picture this, a real-life catch-me-if-you-can thriller. But instead of fake pilot uniforms and forged checks, the weapon of choice here is just a telephone and a computer keyboard. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unraveling the absolutely wild story of Kevin Mitnick. Back in the 1990s, this guy was literally the most wanted hacker in the world. He was vilified by the media, relentlessly hunted by the authorities, and honestly, the government was terrified of him. But we have to ask, who was he really? Was he a digital mastermind capable of starting World War III with a payphone, or just a really clever kid on a giant electronic joyride?
Okay, let's dive into this. Time magazine actually printed that a phone in Mitnick's hands was like giving a gun to a hitman. I mean, wow, that just goes to show the sheer level of mass hysteria and absolute paranoia that surrounded Mitnick's abilities at his peak. People genuinely believed that simply letting this guy near a landline was a critical threat to national security. But to really understand how a single human being becomes viewed as a weapon of mass disruption, we kind of need to rewind the clock a bit.
So how exactly did a kid who just really loved magic tricks grow up to become America's most wanted hacker? Well, the answer lies entirely in the art of misdirection. You see, young Kevin Mitnick didn't start out wanting to break computers at all. He actually wanted to be a magician. He was endlessly fascinated by how magicians control an audience, right? How they pull your attention exactly where they want it to go, making you assume things that just aren't true. At a magic show, you completely expect to be fooled. But in the real world, Mitnick realized that everyday people just naturally want to be helpful, and that simple realization became the entire blueprint for his legendary hacking career.
And that brings us to a really crucial concept, social engineering. Basically, this is about manipulating people, not machines. Mitnick figured out super early on that you don't always need to crack some incredibly complex firewall with millions of lines of code. Why? Because ultimately, hacking a human is almost always easier than hacking technology. The person sitting at the keyboard is usually the weakest link in the chain. And actually, fun fact, that remains the absolute #1 cause of cybersecurity breaches even today.
So this whole idea of social engineering fueled his very first real hack. Let's set the scene. It's 1975 in Los Angeles, and Kevin is just 12 years old. He loves riding the bus around the city, but obviously the fares start to add up. So what does he do? He goes up to a bus driver and spins this totally fake story about a school project that requires interesting cardboard punch shapes. The trusting driver just straight up tells him exactly where to buy the highly specific hole punch tool that the bus company uses. Kevin goes out, buys it, rummages through the depot trash cans for discarded blank transfer booklets, and boom, he's suddenly riding the LA buses all day long for completely free. That is pure social engineering in action.
Section 1. Paranoia and the Dark Side.
As Kevin hit high school, he pretty much outgrew bus tickets and discovered the vast telephone network. He joined up with these early hackers known as phreakers, who basically explored and manipulated telecom systems. Now, he definitely loved the technical side of it, but the social manipulation, that was his true thrill. Get this, he actually managed to access Bruce Springsteen's unlisted number. He literally got the boss's highly guarded private phone number just for fun. How? He just bounced through different phone company departments. He'd pretend to be a colleague named Jake Roberts, then pose as a manager named Tom Hansen, tricking real employees into forwarding calls and verifying fake authorizations. He spun this completely fabricated web of trust just to get a secret. But while Mitnick was out there just having fun with the phone lines, the cultural landscape around him shifted dramatically. In 1983, the thriller movie War Games hits theaters. If you haven't seen it, it features a high school kid who accidentally breaks into a military supercomputer and literally almost starts a global thermonuclear war. The public, who barely understood what computers even were at the time, totally panicked. Pop culture basically changed the image of a hacker overnight, from a curious prankster into an apocalyptic threat. I mean, President Reagan reportedly even ordered his advisors to investigate if the movie's plot was actually possible.
Section 2. The cat and mouse game.
So, while the government is busy preparing for cyber terrorism, Kevin Mitnick is simply making a bet with his hacker friend Lenny for a $150 dinner at a fancy Beverly Hills restaurant. The target for their little bet? DEC, which was the second largest computer manufacturer in the world at the time. Here's exactly how he pulled it off. Lenny taps into a building's fax line just to hide their physical location. Kevin gets on a payphone, poses as a DEC employee, and totally convinces a system operator to run a routine command that lists who is currently logged in. Then, smooth as can be, he tricks her into running a spawn command on Lenny's hidden connection. Just like that, with a single phone call, they completely bypassed DEC's multi-million-dollar security network and had full administrative access to their entire operating system's source code.
Okay, now here is where the story gets absolutely absurd. This DEC source code they got was massive, so they needed a place to stash it online so they wouldn't get caught holding it. Their solution?
They casually sneaked into the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory systems using an old backdoor that was left behind by a German hacker group called the Chaos Computer Club, and they just hid the code there. Well, when NASA finally realized someone was poking around in their network, they found that German backdoor and absolutely panicked. The global news media broke this massive story that a foreign hacker ring had breached NASA. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lenny were literally just using NASA as a temporary digital storage locker to win a dinner bet. You can't make this up.
But you know, the fun didn't last forever. Kevin officially won the DEC bet, but Lenny flat out refused to pay the $150. So, Kevin being Kevin, he retaliated with this brutal IRS wage garnishment prank. He called Lenny's boss, pretended to be from the IRS, and ordered the company to withhold Lenny's paycheck. Well, Lenny was furious, and in a fit of anger, he confessed the entire DEC hack to his boss, who called corporate security, who then called the FBI. Lenny eventually lured Kevin to a parking garage, and the FBI just swarmed him.
Going into the trial, the disconnect between the government's wild claims and the actual reality was staggering. Prosecutors stood up in court and claimed DEC suffered $4 million in damages. They literally looked at the judge and said that Mitnick was capable of whistling a specific tone into a payphone to access air defense systems and initiate a nuclear holocaust. War games had truly poisoned their minds. Kevin actually started laughing out loud in the federal courtroom because the claim was just so incredibly stupid. But the judge believed the government. Kevin was locked up in solitary confinement, completely isolated from the world, simply because they were terrified of what he might supposedly do with a phone.
Section 3. A Cyber Showdown. Let's jump forward to the early 90s. Mitnick is out of prison, but he's bored, which leads him straight into a trap set by a supposed super hacker who is actually an informant named Eric Hines. An incredible cat-and-mouse escalation follows this. Hines promises Mitnick access to a Pacific Bell system that would let him listen in on literally any phone call. Mitnick takes the bait, technically violating his supervised release. But then, Mitnick's instincts kick in. He gets highly suspicious of Hines, physically sweeps him for hidden bugs at a burger joint, and expertly traces Hines' phone numbers. He quickly realizes his own phone is tapped and that Hines is working directly with the FBI. Mitnick immediately destroys his evidence, clones his mobile phone, and with just 3 short months left on his probation, he goes on the run.
While he's on the run, Mitnick's name hits the very front page of the New York Times as cyberspace's most wanted. And hey, every supervillain needs a superhero, right? Entered Tsutomu Shimomura. He's this brilliant researcher at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, kind of like a cross between a hardcore computer nerd and a laid-back surfer dude. He's a highly skilled security expert who regularly consults for the FBI and the NSA. And, very unfortunately for him, Mitnick decides to hack Shimomura's personal servers to steal some sensitive security tools.
Now, to breach Shimomura's system, Mitnick didn't just use a smooth phone call this time. He used a cutting-edge, highly advanced technique called IP spoofing. Think of it like this. He essentially modified the digital return address on his data packets so that Shimomura's network actually thought the incoming commands were coming from a trusted internal computer. The childhood magic trick of misdirection had fully evolved into manipulating the very architecture of the internet itself. By the way, this is a vulnerability that cybersecurity professionals are still battling to this day.
But here's the thing. You do not provoke a cybersecurity superhero and just get away with it. After that hack, things moved incredibly fast. Late 1994, the breach happens. By January, an official warning about IP spoofing hits the front page of the New York Times. Shimomura makes it his absolute personal mission to track down this hacker. He teams up with the internet provider Netcom. They deploy a real-time keylogger to literally watch the hacker type his commands live. They trace the digital breadcrumbs all the way to an apartment complex in Raleigh, North Carolina. And on February 15, 1995, the FBI finally raids Kevin Mitnick.
Section 4. The Power of Authorization.
The very next day after his arrest, the superhero and the supervillain actually faced off in a packed federal courtroom. Mitnick looked at him, simply nodded, and said, "I respect your skills." But outside that courtroom, the hacker community was furious. A massive Free Kevin movement completely erupted online. Supporters hacked Yahoo and even the New York Times demanding his immediate release, arguing the charges against him were wildly exaggerated. And you know what? When the actual evidence was finally scrutinized in court, his supporters were right. The government's terrifying claims of nearly $300 million in damages just evaporated. He ended up paying just $4,125 in restitution. The scary image of the electronic terrorist faded away, revealing the reality, a highly skilled digital joyrider and con artist who never actually sold or monetized the sensitive data he accessed.
Yet despite that massive glaring discrepancy in the actual financial damage, Mitnick still served 5.5 long years in federal prison. and that included 4 full years of pre-trial detention. His case had ultimately become the absolute symbol of 90s hacker paranoia.
And when he was finally released in January of 2000, he faced these incredibly severe restrictions. Listen to this. He was banned from using computers, banned from using any cell phones. He wasn't even allowed to use a television. He was only permitted to use a basic, traditional landline. The authorities still treated him as if he possessed some sort of dark magical powers, seemingly unable to comprehend that he was really just a guy who thoroughly understood how the system worked.
Right before his release, he actually spoke to the public on 60 Minutes, and his own words perfectly humanized the myth that surrounded him. He said, "I saw myself as an electronic joyrider. It was a big game to me." He freely and openly admitted that going into other people's private systems was a gross invasion of privacy and that it was fundamentally wrong. But there was never any malicious, terroristic intent behind it. There was no grand plot to end the world. He honestly just wanted to see if he could get in.
And that insatiable curiosity eventually led to his incredible redemption arc. He totally reinvented himself as a white hat hacker. Once his probation officer finally allowed him to use computers again, Mitnick completely transformed his life. He became a highly sought-after, legitimate corporate security expert. Major companies happily paid the former most wanted hacker top dollar to find the exact same security flaws he used to exploit. He wrote best-selling books, gave massive talks, and became an absolute legend in the cybersecurity industry, until his tragic passing from pancreatic cancer in 2023.
Mitnick himself once wrote that a single word changed hacking forever for him: authorization. That one word magically transformed him from a hunted supervillain into a highly sought-after hero. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If the only real difference between being America's most wanted cybercriminal and a highly paid corporate security consultant is simply authorization, what does that say about how we view hackers today? The line between digital villain and digital hero is incredibly, sometimes uncomfortably thin. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it completely shifted your perspective. Until next time.